One of the questions I get asked the most is how I manage to find time for art and YouTube while being a full-time mom. And whenever I get that question, I can't help but feel a little bit like an imposter. Because I'm not a superwoman, I'm not a supermom, and I definitely don't have a secret formula. The truth is, some days my system works, and other days it doesn't. Some days I feel more motivated, more focused, and other days I don't follow my system at all. But I always try to come back to it the next day and begin again. Time is limited, we cannot stretch it. So the only real solution is learning how to choose how we use it. And in order to make time for the things that matter the most, sometimes we need to make adjustments. For example, before my youngest was born, I used to dedicate almost an entire day each week to cleaning the house, and now that's simply not possible anymore. But having a clean and organized space is still very important to me, because it helps me think more clearly, it helps me plan with more intention. So instead of long uninterrupted hours, I started doing things in small blocks, and over time this became the way I approach almost everything in my life. There's a concept that has stayed with me for a long time, the idea of improving just 1% at a time. I once heard a story about a team that was struggling in every possible area, and instead of trying to fix everything at once, their coach decided to improve just 1% in each area. Very small changes, but consistent ones. And over time, those small improvements added up and completely transformed their results. And I think about that a lot in this phase of my life, because motherhood takes a big part of my time and energy. So instead of trying to do everything perfectly, I focus on making small progress in each area. Even if it's just a little bit, because little by little, it makes a difference. So in this video I want to share my current system, the one that has been helping me stay a little more organized and intentional in my days. It's not perfect and it's always evolving, but this is what is working for me right now. I'll start with my planning system because this is probably the thing that changed my productivity the most. I used to plan everything digitally on GoodNotes on my iPad, but over time I stopped using it, because it wasn't always with me. And if I didn't have my iPad nearby, I couldn't write things down when they came to mind. Tasks, ideas, things I needed to remember, they just stayed in my head. And slowly I started relying on what I like to call mental planning, which, as you can imagine, didn't go very well. I became more overwhelmed, I kept forgetting things, and I started procrastinating more and more, sometimes even delaying tasks for months. So I decided to go back to an analog system. I had tried bullet journaling before, but it didn't last very long, mostly because I was too focused on making it look beautiful, instead of making it work. So this time I decided to keep it as simple and functional as possible. I found the channel of Kaitlin Gray and I completely fell in love with her system. So instead of reinventing everything, I simply adopted her layouts. My goal wasn't to be creative here, it was to find something that actually worked. This is not a full bullet journal setup, so I won't go into too much detail, but I'll give you a quick overview of how I use mine. I start with a future log, where I write upcoming events and tasks, usually in pencil because things can change. At the beginning of each month, I create my monthly pages, including a calendar, important dates, a space for milestones and gratitude, and a list of tasks. For my monthly tasks, I use a column-based method where each column represents a week. This helps me distribute tasks across the month in a more flexible way. I also track my mood throughout the day, morning, afternoon, and evening, just to better understand my energy. Then every week I plan ahead. I start by reflecting on the previous week, writing down my wins, and then I set my intentions for the week ahead. And from there, I organize my tasks and routines for each day. I used to keep my daily log inside my bullet journal, but I found that I was filling it too quickly. So I started using a small A6 notebook just for my daily tasks. This way, I can carry it with me everywhere, and I always know what I need to focus on during the day. My system is not fully analog, it's more of a hybrid system. Because with what I like to call mom brain, I forget things very easily. So even though I plan everything in my bullet journal, I also transfer my events to Google Calendar. And I use alarms for almost everything. Sometimes the day before, sometimes an hour before, just to make sure I don't forget. It might sound like a lot, but it really helps me stay on track. But while my bullet journal works really well for planning my days and my tasks, it hasn't worked as well for bigger projects. I've tried organizing my illustration projects and YouTube videos inside it, but over time I realized that things would get lost between pages. Notes would become scattered and hard to find, and I would often lose track of my ideas. I also used Pinterest to collect visual references, but because everything was separated, it was hard to keep a clear vision of my projects, and that often left me feeling even more overwhelmed. I felt like I needed a system that could bring everything together, my ideas, my references, my projects, in a way that felt more visual and connected. So I started using Milanote. Milanote is a visual tool that helps you organize projects by bringing together notes, images, links, and tasks, all in one place. And for me, this has been incredibly helpful because I really need to see everything at once. If something is not in front of me, I tend to forget about it. So having everything visually organized in one place makes a big difference. Let me show you how I use it. This is one of my current projects, a children's book I'm working on. On this board, I keep all the core information about the project, things like the title, the format, the timeline, and the main tasks. For bigger projects like these, I like to break everything down into smaller steps so it feels more manageable. I also organize my ideas visually with different sections for concept, references, and development. For example, I created a mood board where I collected visual references and inspiration before starting. I usually work with a few keywords in mind, things like mood, atmosphere, or visual language, and then I gather images that reflect that. Having all these references together helps me stay connected to the feeling I want to create. I also use boards to collect more specific references for each part of the project, so instead of having everything scattered across different places, I can keep everything organized and easy to access. And then I use Milanote to plan the structure of the project, mapping out ideas, sketches, and notes, which makes it much easier to move from ideas into actual work. I also use it to explore characters, test ideas, and define things like color palettes. One thing I really like is that I can create color swatches directly from images, which helps me build a cohesive visual language. And I can also add handwritten notes, which is something I personally love. Sometimes I think better when I write by hand, so being able to do that on my tablet and have everything synced here is really helpful. I also really like that I can access Milanote on my phone, which makes it easy to check my boards or add ideas when I'm away from my desk. For example, when I'm out or even when I quickly think of something and don't want to forget it. I don't only use Milanote for illustration projects. For example, I also use it to organize my video projects, bringing together things like the structure, voiceover notes, ideas, and filming tasks in one place, so I can see the whole process more clearly. Let me show you how I would start a board from scratch. This is a project I've been thinking about and wanted to share with you. I haven't started working on it yet, so this is really the first stage of the process. I realized that just like Milanote helps me have a clear visual overview of my creative projects, I also wanted something similar for my tasks, but in a physical way. So the idea for this project is to create a visual task board that allows me to see all the different areas of my life at once, so nothing gets lost or forgotten. Milanote also has different templates you can use, like mood boards, project plans, or storyboards, which can be really helpful as a starting point. But in this case, I'm going to start from an empty board and build my own. I usually begin by adding a general idea for the project, along with a few visual references. I like to collect images that inspire me, and one feature I find really useful is the web clipper, which allows me to send images directly from Pinterest into my board with just one click. Then I start organizing those images into groups, depending on what they represent, like ideas, visual inspiration, or direction. I also like to add a simple task list just to break the project into smaller steps and make it easier to move forward. And sometimes I switch to my tablet to write or sketch ideas by hand, which feels like a more natural way of thinking through things. Then I might create a separate board for more detailed exploration, like specific elements, sketches, or categories, so I can develop the project further without overcrowding the main board. I can also define a color palette directly from an image and connect everything visually, so I always have a clear reference while I work. For me, the biggest difference is being able to see everything in one place. It helps me stay focused, reduces that feeling of overwhelm, and keeps me connected to my ideas throughout the process. And once I have everything organized like this, it becomes much easier to actually start working on the project. If you'd like to try Milanote for yourself, you can sign up for free without any time limit using the link on screen. You can also find all the details in the description. Now that I've gathered all my references and ideas in Milanote, it's time to start bringing the project to life. This idea actually came from a conversation I had with my mentor, Joanna Henly. At the time, I was feeling quite overwhelmed, and I noticed I was having a hard time focusing on what really mattered, especially when it came to balancing different areas of my work. I told her that I tend to focus on one thing at a time, but in a way that makes me forget everything else. For example, if I'm working on a YouTube video, it's like that's the only thing I can see. And then I forgot about Instagram, or my blog, or my newsletter. And she suggested something very simple, a visual board where I could see all the different areas I need to focus on, all in one place. So instead of having everything separated, I could have a more global view of things like Milanote. And that really stayed with me, because I realized that what I struggled with is not planning, it's seeing everything at once. So I love this idea, and I've been wanting to put it into practice for a long time. And I also knew that I needed this to be something physical, something I could actually see every day, not just another system hidden inside a notebook or an app. So instead of overcomplicating it, I decided to keep this process very simple. I'm creating one card for each category, like YouTube, Instagram, blog, newsletter, and my illustration work, and placing them directly on the wall. I'll also add a few small illustrations and painted elements just to make the space feel a bit more personal and inspiring. The idea is not to make something perfect, but something I can actually use. Something flexible that I can change over time and that helps me see everything at a glance. So this is really more about creating a space for clarity than creating something finished. Another thing that has been really important for me is journaling. It's not really a planning tool, but more a way to organize my thoughts. Especially when I'm feeling overwhelmed, writing helps me slow down and understand what I actually need. I don't have a fixed routine for it, I just write whenever I can. One of the things that has helped me the most is simply reducing how much time I spend on my phone. Not just when I'm working, but especially during those in-between moments in the day. Because I've noticed that those are usually the moments when ideas start to come. When I'm just present, doing something simple, or even feeling a bit bored. And if I immediately reach for my phone, I kind of interrupt that process. So creating a bit of space away from constant input has been really important for my creativity. When I don't feel like working or I'm not sure where to start, I usually go back to something very simple. This is actually a technique I had used in the past, but somehow forgot over time. And it was my mentor, Joanna, who reminded me how helpful it can be, especially when we tend to procrastinate. I just set a timer for 20 minutes. No pressure, no expectations, just 20 minutes. And most of the time, that's enough to get me started. Most of my focused work happens during my son's nap, and that time is quite limited. So I try to treat this as something quite intentional, almost protected. I prepare things in advance, so when that window opens, I can just sit down and begin. It's not always perfect, but having that small, dedicated moment makes a big difference. And finally, I try to let go of the idea that work has to happen in perfect conditions. Sometimes I just use whatever small window I have. It's not always ideal, but it's real. And I think learning to work within those in-between moments has been one of the most important things for me. I don't think there's a perfect system, and I don't think there's a way to do everything. But I do believe that small, intentional steps can slowly shape the way we live and create. This is just what's been working for me in this season of my life. A little slower, a little more flexible, but still moving forward. And maybe that's enough. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video. Bye!